Okay, IGN's the 25 best horror games ever made list came out, and I'm already seeing some spoilers at the top. Alien Isolation, Five Nights at Freddy's, Phasmophobia, PT, and Resident Evil 2. Those are the tags they put at the top. This came out, it was published, I think, October 23rd. So I haven't seen it. I haven't seen the list. I do know what number 1 is, but I don't know anything else other than that. So we're gonna check out the 25 best horror games ever made according to IGN. Horror means different things to different people. I love this little AI written intro. It's not AI written, but it reads like it. It may as well be. Some people hate clowns. Some are troubled by the unknown of a dark space under the bed. And some, my old flatmate, will run away if a wooden spoon gets too close to brushing against their skin. The same broad range of fears can be found in video games as well. Sure, there are jumpy moments in The Last of Us Part 2, and Bloodborne's Yharnam is dressed to the nines in gothic horror. But here we're looking at those entirely scary experiences, those games that chill us to the core and are purely horrific, yet brilliant. With an emphasis placed on what we find the scariest, here are the 25 best horror games of all time. Wow, that's incredible. I do kind of wonder, can we put ad block on? Ad block is on, but I'm getting ads, whatever. All right, let's see what they got. 25 puppet combos, stay out of the house. You know what? Stay out of the house is a pretty scary game. I don't entirely disagree with this, depending on what else they have on the list. And I guarantee, if you've got a problem with this, I gotta say, you probably haven't played Stay Out of the House. Because it's one thing to watch it on YouTube, it's another thing to play it. And I found myself when I was playing it, part of it was because I wasn't recording it when I was playing it. I did like a review video of it. But I think it is a very atmospheric and scary game. I think it's, honestly, Stay Out of the House is probably Puppet Combo's best game. And I say that with full respect to Night Ripper, okay? Which was my former favorite. It's really good. It's like the best parts of all of their games put together. And what's funny is they basically made Stay Out of the House as a response to Granny, which is really funny. Because it's a very Granny inspired game. It's basically like Granny if it was actually scary. So yeah, actually I don't disagree with this yet. But it depends on what else they're gonna have further down the list, right? You know what I've decided? I'm gonna cover up the ad because I don't like it being there. Now I would love to read their little thing here, but we really don't need to read their opinion. 24, Slender the 8 Pages. Okay, now here we have an issue, I think. So, yeah, Slender the 8 Pages. I would say, first of all, putting this as a scarier game than Stay Out of the House is simply not true. Second, I have actually played this semi-recently. I replayed it, I think in 2018, 2019, as part of my Still Scary series, where I revisited older indie horror games and saw how they stack up today. And I think that Slender the 8 Pages, you know, this was kind of a viral horror game sensation, but I do not think it deserves to be anywhere near a top 25 list of horror games. Personally, it's got like no depth to it at all. It's basically all revolving around a very predictable jump scare that you can avoid by collecting pages longer. I just don't think that it should be anywhere near a top 25 list for horror games. You know, with that said, there's a lot of respect that I have for Slender the 8 Pages about popularizing the indie horror game. A lot of people that weren't around in 2012 probably don't understand how big this was. You know, Amnesia: The Dark Descent kind of jump-started people's interest in indie horror games in the mainstream, but I think Slender the 8 Pages really brought in the crowd that would eventually get hooked onto Five Nights at Freddy's and really make it a lot more of a mainstream sensation. And frankly, I think without games like Slender the Eight Pages, I'm not sure that Resident Evil would have ever been revitalized the way it has, and I'm not sure that we would have horror games are back like we did this year with Silent Hill 2, Alan Wake 2 last year. You know, these are AAA horror games coming back. I think that, you know, games like Slender are going to be not respected as they should in that respect. However, influence aside, top 25 horror games, it shouldn't be on here. So, but I just had to give it, I had to give it its flowers, you know? All right, here we go. The Evil Within at number 23. See, I don't think Evil Within is a particularly scary game. I think it is the scarier of the two Evil Within games, but I don't know. It being on the list is a little strange to me. Because I think of it as more of an action game than anything else. It's more of like a Resident Evil 4 clone than it is a scary game, I would say. But yeah, I don't hate it being on the list, I guess. It just depends on what else is on here, you know. We'll see. Condemned Criminal Origins. You know, I remember playing Condemned, you know, about 12 years ago or so. It's made by Monolith, the developer of Fear, which I consider to be grossly overrated as a horror game. Condemned. I liked Condemned more than Fear. It sort of pioneered the mannequin horror shtick that you see in tons of indie horror games now. I mean, Bloober Team definitely played this and was just like, we should do that in every game forever. The mannequins are behind you. But I mean, at the time, those mannequin sequences were pretty scary, and I think it's just one of those games I want to kind of go back and replay. I think it's a good game, but I think when we're talking about scariest horror games, I just don't know about that just yet. I never found it particularly frightening, and horror is subjective, but I just feel like in a retrospective sort of view of things, I'm not sure if it makes 22 for me. Again, I wanted to see a lot of these early picks. I'm like, well, what else is on here first? Like, what goes ahead of this? You know, this goes behind whatever. Let's find out. 21, Manhunt. I actually have not played Manhunt. This is a Rockstar game, which you may know is the developer of Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, you know, Bully, lots of other games. LA Noire. Manhunt, though, was like, it's probably one of the most controversial video games of all time. It like single-handedly brought back the violent video games are bad for our society political arguments. Isn't Manhunt the reason why we have like ESRB ratings or something like that? Or am I just making that up? There's something like that with Manhunt. Like Manhunt is the reason why we have something, but I can't. It might not be that. It might be something else. It is, from what I understand, a really dark and shocking game. But I guess I can't really comment on how scary it is because I haven't played it. I don't know. Yeah, I know that Manhunt is like banned in some countries. True. Oh, Mortal Kombat is the reason for the SRB? Okay. I knew I was just making that up, but it's something like that, I thought. It's a really graphic game, but I feel like scary. Interesting. Okay. Okay. I don't agree with this. You know what? I've done a couple of reactions. To game lists, and for some reason they love putting Inside really high on things. I like Inside a lot. Playdead did an amazing job with it. It's their masterpiece, but it's not scary. And I think Limbo is actually a scarier game than Inside. Limbo was their game before this. It's a very odd choice. Inside is a very odd choice to me to have here. Very weird. Anyone who's played Inside always wants to talk about the ending. That's perfectly understandable. Yeah, I mean, the ending is great. Side scroller dripping with an oppressive, unsettling atmosphere. I mean, yeah, it's atmospheric, but like, is Inside scarier than any of the other games in its genre? Is it scarier than Little Nightmares? I don't think so. I think Little Nightmares is scarier than this. So, but then again, Little Nightmares might be further up on the list. I wouldn't agree with that either. We'll just have to see. Hang on one second. Okay, that works. That works. That works. Now, okay, now we can see what you guys are saying. Good. Hopefully this will motivate you to have good things to say. All right, so Inside, number 20. Not feeling it. I don't know what this obsession is that like mainstream games journalism has with being like, Inside is one of the greatest games of all time. It's really good, but they love putting it on these lists that I don't think it deserves to be on. Or at least not as high. Oh, I am such a Visage hater. I really am, and it sucks because like, you know, I was a Kickstarter for the game, and I was really excited to play it, and I thought at first that it was going in a good direction, but it's way too derivative of like PT and creating an experience that was like exactly like it in a lot of ways, and without like improving on any of it. I feel like the sequences were just, I don't know, kind of boring. It did have some good scares, like there's like an often clipped moment where I'm like walking into the bathroom and there's an old lady that kind of peers around the corner at me, and she got me really good. Okay, but I don't know. I just feel like the rest of it, I can't tell you much of anything. And I played it 3 different instances for the updates and stuff. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I really think its biggest crime is that it's kind of boring. And I don't think it deserves to be on a scariest game of all time list. I don't. But it's the type of game that for some reason, like, even super mainstream horror fans have played Visage, and I don't really know why. Like, even your friend that like doesn't play that many horror games, like Visage is one of the games on the list that like they could play for like Halloween or something. Like, ooh, I want to play a spooky game for Halloween. Ooh, I'll play Visage, you know, 5 years after it comes out. It's like that type of game. So it's kind of trendy in that respect, and that's the only reason I can see them putting it on here, frankly, because I think even among indie horror games, it's like just very average. I don't know. I'm a hater, I recognize that, but I just feel like there's so many other games you could put on here ahead of it. Of course, they're talking about Silent Hills, PT, what was it? Allison Road. Does anybody remember Allison Road? The ill-fated game that preceded Visage that was supposed to be the spiritual successor to PT, but it never came out. I feel like Allison Road's trailer did like irreparable damage to the indie horror scene, because after it came out and then Allison Road never was sold or made, I feel like people have been trying to deliver on its promise ever since then. I think Visage is one of those that kind of happened concurrently that got caught in that trap. But anyway, Visage hating done. Phasmophobia being number 18, I think is really high. I think also Phasmophobia now is... Phasmophobia is an odd game. It is, because I will say there's video evidence of this on YouTube. The first time I played Phasmophobia, I thought it was incredible. I thought this is like the first time in a long time that I've played a horror game where it feels like I'm in a movie. There was like a particular house that I was in that I've been in many times since then. It's never given the same effect, where it's like the ghost was like picking off my friends one by one, and it really felt like the ghost was just kind of, it had like a personality. I don't know how they did it, and sometimes I go back and I watch that sequence in that video and I'm like, it still hits. Phasmophobia like slapped. I feel like now it's kind of lost that for me. Anytime I load up Phasmophobia now, it feels like everything's very calculated. And I think unfortunately it's just a game that everybody's kind of solved. Like people that are really into Phasmophobia, like level 5,000, they basically just don't blink. They walk into a house, like a plate moves over, and they're like, I know what ghost it is, and then they go home. I don't know. It's like no other ghost moves a plate like that. 5 pixels to the left. That means it's a shadow, or I don't know what the names are. I just kind of feel like that's what I think of when I think of Phasmophobia now. Is like all the people that have played it way too much and know everything about it, and they've solved it, and all the mystery of the game is gone. But when the mystery of the game was still there, it was pretty terrifying. My first couple times playing the game before I saw like patterns and stuff, I was like, damn, this game, it feels like alive. So on one hand, I understand why they have it so high, number 18, but I just kind of feel like unless you've only played it once or twice or maybe 3 times, it has lost the shine in terms of the scariness factor. So I think ultimately I disagree with it being 18. But I do like the spirit, no pun intended, with which they came at this, you know. Okay. Okay, you know what? That's just... I cannot believe this is on the list. Dead by Daylight. A game that I have a lot of experience playing. If you didn't know, I've played a lot of Dead by Daylight. Too much, one could say. I would be one of those people saying too much. Let's give a little history, okay? So I was actually among the first people in the world to play Dead by Daylight. You may not know this. I played Dead by Daylight at PAX East 2016, I think it was. Or it might have even been 2015. It was before the game was even out on Steam in early access. Definitely before the full release. I played it on the show floor. I was horrible at it. I got to meet the dev team. I got to meet Matthew Cote. I'm a real OG with Dead by Daylight. When it came out, I played it in the beta. When the only killer was Trapper, okay? There were no other killers. There were no other... There might not even have been another map. I think it was just like Shelter Woods. But, so I've been on and on with Dead by Daylight since its inception. And when it came out in 2016, and you were creeping around in the fog... And the Trapper was after you and stuff, you know, I can see it. It did have its moments where it was pretty atmospheric and it was pretty scary, even if you were playing with your friends. However, in the 8 years since then, Dead by Daylight has been slowly transformed into an e-sport. It is a competitive game now, and the fear factor for me, with the exception of some situations with some of the killers, is completely gone. The game is far scarier, ironically, if you're playing as the killer, because that means that you've got to contend with potentially 4 awful people who want to make your life miserable. They want to chase you around the map, flicking their flashlight in your face, stunning you by coming out of lockers, slamming the pallet down in your face. They want to bully the hell out of you. They're the true killers. And I'm not saying this, if you're like a DBD head, you're probably like, oh, typical killer main stuff. I probably play a lot more Survivor historically than killer. I played sort of an equal amount, but I'm just saying that's really all the horror that the game can offer now, because it's simply a competitive game at this point. The atmosphere is pretty much gone unless you're playing against a stealth killer like Michael Myers, Ghostface. You know, you can get some pretty good jump scares with them, or Pig, or somebody like that. If you're playing in certain situations like that, it can be pretty scary still, but it's not like atmospheric dread, really. It's just like surprise. With that said, while DBD has moments like that, it's like so negligible. We're talking about the top 25 best horror games of all time, and you put Dead by Daylight at 17? Like, if you put it at 25, I might be like, okay, you're kind of You're kind of memeing, but we'll let it slide. 17, though, you put this ahead of Stay Out of the House. You put this ahead of Condemned Criminal Origins. You put this ahead of even Evil Within. Hell, you put this ahead of Phasmophobia. I would say Phasmophobia is scarier than Dead by Daylight. It is very difficult for multiplayer horror games to have a fear factor to them at all, if you know that like a real person is on the other end, because it humanizes them already. And once you humanize the other characters in the game, it takes away kind of the fear factor for a lot of these situations where it's supposed to be like, you know, there's supposed to be some mystery there. It's supposed to be some kind of like monster or evil entity or something that you can't quite understand. But when it's just like Greg slamming away on his keyboard, you know, Jared over in Florida, or like, I don't know, Chloe over there in the Netherlands, it's like, that's not scary, you know? That's just, I'm just like socializing at that point. So I think I have a big problem with Dead by Daylight being on here. Yeah, the Super Smash Bros. Of horror, etc. I mean, they've got great horror icons in the game, don't get me wrong. They've got some listed here: Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Pyramid Head, Resident Evil's Nemesis. Very interesting that they basically don't say anything in this little brief here about why it's scary, which is what the list is supposed to be based on. They just talk about how it's a good game, and I think there's an argument to be made for that, but yeah, just not good. Wow, this list is terrible. Until Dawn is a funny game. It is a funny game, and at times it can be thrilling, it can be exciting, it can be action-packed, but it is not scary. And we had this issue with another one of these articles. I think it was Game Rant's top horror games. Until Dawn is not a scary game. A Game Rant had it at like number 3 or something like that, something ridiculous. So like at least it's not that high. I love Until Dawn. I think it's Supermassive's best game, bar none, and I've played like 8 or 9 of them, however many there are. But yeah, it's just not scary, and it shouldn't be number 16. This is like ridiculous, you know? It's like ridiculous that you have Phasmophobia, Dead by Daylight, Until Dawn as like a string of games on this list. It's a B movie. It's a horror B movie basically turned into a game. I mean, you wouldn't say that like Critters 2 is one of the scariest movies of all time, you know? You wouldn't say whatever, you guys get the point. Anyway. Okay, 15, Alan Wake 2. Very interesting. I'm glad to see Alan Wake 2 on the list. It's definitely the scarier of the 2 Alan Wake games. It's definitely the better of the 2 Alan Wake games. And it's definitely one of the best horror games of all time. Scariest horror game, we'll have to see what's ahead of it. I don't think that Alan Wake 2 is particularly scary, but it is so good. And yeah, the more I think about it, the more time that passes between me and when I played Alan Wake 2, which you can see on my full playthrough on YouTube. All 18 videos. The more I really enjoy and appreciate it, and I do want to play the DLC for it. I haven't done that yet. But yeah, scary. I mean, there are moments for sure. It's got kind of that like Twin Peaks atmosphere, you know. But I would say it's more like awesome than scary. I'm gonna go back because I could have sworn that they said that this was a list of like the scariest games. Did they not say that? We're looking at those entirely scary experiences, those games that chill us to the core and are purely horrific, with an emphasis placed on what we find the scariest. Okay, so I didn't make that up. I was like gaslighting myself. I was like, is that what they said? Okay. But yeah, glad to see Alan Wake 2 on the list. 14, Soma. Okay, Soma, I'm sorry. It's gotta be top 10. You guys are messing around. Put it at 14. Soma is one of those games that I remember when it released in 2015. And it released some mixed reactions from the frictional crowd because a lot of people were expecting like basically Amnesia 3 or the real Amnesia 2, but underwater is basically more what they were wanting. And then when Soma came out, it kind of offered something better. I remember when it came out, I said after I've completed it, I was like, this is Frictional's best game. You know, no matter what you think about Amnesia, it's not their scariest game, but it is their best game. And I think that comment has aged really well in the 10 years since it came out. It is their best game, and I'm not sure that they're ever going to top Soma. The reason it's their best game is not because of the overt horror gameplay, but more so the story, and as they go deeper and deeper, literally and figuratively, into the narrative, it just becomes more and more just fucked up. Soma's fucked up. It's like existential horror, you know. It's not like a Lovecraftian horror necessarily. There's nothing like really. There's nothing super eldritch in it that I can remember. Maybe I'm forgetting something. It has more of like a, you know, technological fear to it, but it is existential dread in that game, and they do it really well. The story and characters are amazing. I do want to go back and replay it. So I think that putting it at 14 is kind of underrating the horror that brings, and I'm curious to see if they touch on it in their brief. Elevated horror. I'm not familiar with that term. Let's see. Yeah. A non-combative experience. Man, you know, they're riding for like the mainstream horror crowd with that. Just so you know, this is a non-combative experience because it's a deal breaker for some people. An emphasis on avoiding danger. For frights with an even helping of thought, this is the ocean floor trip for you. So they're basically just like sort of describing the game in general, not really like why they put it on the list. But yeah, Soma should be higher. 13, Clock Tower. We're going with Clock Tower: The First Fear, actually, as it's known, at least in America. This is the 1995 Super Nintendo game, which was one of the last games released for Super Nintendo, I believe. It may have been the last. I don't know. 1995 is like PS1 era, right? I think they actually did they release it on PC and stuff? They actually just remade this game called Clock Tower Rewind as of today. I mean, it came out like last week, so I do need to check it out. But this is the first Clock Tower game. It's one of the first horror games. This predates Resident Evil 1 for the PS1. I think probably the only like horror games I can think of that came out before this one are the original Alone in the Dark, and then stuff like, you know, 3D Monster Maze and stuff like that. So this is one of the really early ones. With that said, I think this is really high. Because like, I like Clock Tower: The First Fear, but it's like a console point and click game almost. Like, it's got that point and click adventure feel to it. You've even got a cursor that you move around, and I like all of that, but it is kind of an awkward game overall. What are you guys talking about? Faith? Oh, somebody asked about the game. Yeah. Anyway, back to what I was saying. Yeah, I feel like this is really a strange placement, frankly. And they don't really talk much about it. I mean, I like the game, but like, especially if this is like the only Clock Tower game on the list, I think it's an odd one. Anyway, okay. Forbidden Siren 2. Actually, I haven't played Forbidden Siren 2. I do have the original Siren. I did not really enjoy it. So this isn't Siren the Blood Curse, right? That's a different one. That was like 2010, 2011. Yeah, did this even come out in the US? I'm not really familiar with this. But yeah, the first Siren I didn't really enjoy, so obviously I never played the second one. Anyway, I don't really have any thoughts on it, frankly. Yeah, PAL only. That's what I thought. I don't think it released in the US. Resident Evil 1995. I mean, or 1996 rather. Oh boy. Do I really want to start this knockdown drag out fight now? I'm kind of a Resident Evil original hater a little bit. I think that the 2002 remake is like the definitive way to experience this game. If you go back and you play the original, I don't know, I feel like it just doesn't hit. Stuff like the infamous dogs crashing through the windows moment. Like, I remember playing it and being like, that was it. And it's like that in the remake too. But I feel like the remake has such better atmosphere. And I mean, obviously this is 1996, right? It came out 6 years later. But I feel like if I were making this list, I would put the remake on here instead. And I feel like they're not going to. Because the remake is like, Resident Evil 1 remake, literally one of the best remakes of all time. Of any game. Like, they kept the fixed camera angles, they kept like everything about the game really that people liked, but they just enhanced it and made it better, I think. Yeah. Oh, you're gonna make people mad with this. Oh, survival horror gamers are mad. They're fuming. Smoke is literally coming out of their ears right now. They cannot stand that you guys put Five Nights at Freddy's over the granddaddy of survival horror games, Resident Evil. Resident Evil, I love my fixed camera angles! How dare you! You put the children's game ahead of it! You know what's funny? I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's right, okay? I don't think that Five Nights at Freddy's is a top 10 best horror game. But I do think that it gets disrespected so much by people that have never played it, that think that it's reliant on jump scares, when actually, I would say, as someone who's actually played it, it's very reliant on atmosphere. I would say the atmosphere is the strength of the game and not the jump scares. The jump scares are like the primary, like, gameplay influenced horror. But I think the atmosphere in the game and the way that it ramps up the difficulty and introduces enemies and stuff is actually really, really well designed in the first one, at least. The second one gets like a little too frantic with things, and 3 is just like kind of a bad game. But I think 1 is actually really solid in a lot of ways, and I think it gets shit on too much by people who have never played it, never given it a chance, or if they have, they've already been influenced too much by the online fandom and they let it taint their perspective. So I think Five Nights at Freddy's is a kind of a complicated game to assess in terms of like where it would stand on a list like this. But I think 10 is too high, but I think it deserves to be on the list. Because like this game, when I played it in 2014, not knowing really what I was getting into, playing this, it's unfortunate because you can't really play Five Nights at Freddy's now without knowing what you're getting into. But playing it back then, it was like a privilege, I guess, that we'll never get back, because it had really unique atmosphere to it that I think it's unmatched. We'll never see anything like it again, because now these days mascot horror games are a dime a dozen, and they kind of just like rush into the next story beat constantly, whereas the original Five Nights at Freddy's just kind of, it was like a weird thing that existed, you know, especially as like just a game that you could download at the time for free, from what I remember anyway, or maybe I just got it for free from Scott, I don't know. It was yeah, it was just kind of like a weird little thing that existed on the internet, and it became like this, it became Slender the 8 Pages on steroids after that. Actually, you know, I think that FNAF 1 was a hit, but FNAF 2 is actually what put it over the edge. That's the one that I remember really thinking like, wow, this thing is taking off. The crazy train has left the station, you know? So I think 1 is actually like, it's kind of in a different dimension from all the other games for me. All the other 8 games or whatever there are. So yeah, I think 1 gets shed on too much. It's actually a pretty solid horror game. Number 10 solid? No. But it's actually not completely ridiculous to put it on the list. That's basically what I'm saying. Resident Evil 4, number 9. I love Resident Evil 4. And we're talking about the remake here, by the way, 2023, even though they've got a picture of the original game from 2004. Yeah, okay. I actually like the remake more than the original. Controversial opinion. But, I mean, it's kind of notorious for being an action game more than a horror game, I think. This is like one of those scenarios where it's like, horror is so subjective. But I think even with horror being subjective, I just think that RE4 being an action game should not have it be in the top 10. I don't think there should be any action games in the top 10, but unfortunately, since this is IGN, we're gonna see Dead Space, you know, we're gonna see other action games moving on. So I mean, I love Resident Evil 4. It's one of my top 5 games of all time. But yeah, number 9, oh boy, that is just bad. Left 4 Dead 2 is not scary, man. It's a zombie game. Like back in 2009, I think it had a little bit of horror pedigree. You know, I mean, you got stuff like The Witch. It's got moments, but it's primarily like, I mean, I said it, didn't I? We were gonna see more action games. This is an action game. This is just straight up a zombie shooter. So I do not think that this should be anywhere near the top 10. This is bonkers, Banana Town. This is awful. Outlast, number 7. Interesting. You know, again, I replayed Outlast in 2018, and I think it's a little more boring than maybe a lot of people remember it. With that said, the Whistleblower DLC is like goated horror content. It's got like the breakneck, you know, thrilling pacing that I wish that the main game had more of, and I think it should be considered as part of the main game. 2013, Outlast changed horror games for sure. This came out within a week of Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs, the long-awaited sequel to Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which did not change horror games. It delivered the status quo, delivered on what was expected, and that's why it was boring. But Outlast kind of revolutionized things a little bit by taking things in a more action direction, but without using combat, which was pretty novel. It basically took the chase that was popularized in Amnesia and was like, that's the whole game now. The whole game is a chase sequence. So I think Outlast being a top 10 scary game, there's an argument for it, but I think 7's a little high. I'm also not going to nitpick on a list where Left 4 Dead 2 is number 8, though, you know? I just want to say that about Outlast. I actually think Outlast 2 is a scarier game, but it's a distinctly worse game. So, you know, kind of give and take a little bit there. Alien Isolation, number 6. Sure. You know what? I'm happy to see it, considering what else we've seen on the list. Considering what else we've seen, Alien Isolation. I will say, you know, earlier when I was talking about my first time playing Phasmophobia and being like, the game is alive, and not remembering feeling that way in a while. I think the last time I felt like that before Phasmophobia was Alien Isolation, because when the alien is patrolling, it really feels for a moment like you kind of forget, especially in your first few encounters with it, you kind of forget that you're playing a game. You kind of are so immersed in the atmosphere, and the alien's behavior feels so realistic in some of the things that it does. You kind of forget that you're playing a video game a little bit, and it's like a video game AI. Of course, after a certain point, you get really used to it. You start to see the pattern in its behavior, and you start abusing them, and you know, and then it becomes like, oh, I gotta hide in the locker again, and you get a little too cavalier about it. But for the first few sequences, the alien is terrifying, and I think just based on that experience alone, I think if you don't play a lot of horror games, if like you play, I don't know, one a year or something like that, or you just haven't played that many, Alien Isolation, probably the scariest game you can play, I think, and you'll probably be terrified all the way through. And it's not just the alien, like the Working Joes. Oh my god, the Working Joes are pretty spooky too, I think. I was kind of surprised, I think, on replay. I was like, the Working Joes are crazy. They're no slouch either. They can jump scare you. They can, you know, it's kind of creepy when like they spot you and they don't act right away. Like and so you kind of have that moment where you're like, did they see me or not? Did I lose them? Because they'll see you, and a lot of times they won't start chasing you right away. They'll just be like, or they'll be like, you're not supposed to be here, or something like that. And then you're kind of sitting there and you're like, are they gonna come after me, or am I good? Am I safe? Sometimes they'll just watch you for a minute and they won't say anything. I think the Working Joes are really well done in that game, and they're kind of an underrated part of the horror aspect. Okay, we're up to the top 5, actually. Before we move on to the top 5, any predictions for the top 5? Any predictions for the top 5? I'm thinking Silent Hill 2 has got to be there. PT, we unfortunately already saw in the tags at the start of the list. But I'm wondering what the other 3 are. You would think they would have to have a Fatal Frame game in there. I'm going to say Fatal Frame 2 is probably my prediction. That tends to be the one that makes these lists. Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7 should absolutely be on the list. Honestly, I think that if they've got RE4 at 9 and the original Resident Evil at 11, then they should definitely have RE2 remake on here. But we'll see. We'll see what they decide to put. White Day. Yeah, the original White Day. The one that basically doesn't exist anymore. They gotta have on here. But I don't think that they will. That's the problem. Amnesia, you know, Amnesia the Dark Descent, you gotta wonder if it's on here. Although I think Amnesia the Bunker is actually a scarier game these days, you know, with retrospective. Oh, yeah, we haven't seen Dead Space. The fact that, like, if they have Condemned Criminal Origins at 22 and Evil Within at 23, you'd think they would have Dead Space. Dead Space is probably going to be a top 5, yeah. All right, let's find out. Time to peel back the curtain. Number 5, Dead Space, yep. Yeah, like I said, we weren't done with the action games. I like Dead Space, but it is ultimately an action horror game, and this is actually the remake. I like that they're putting the remakes on here because I think... Honestly, I think that a lot of these horror remakes are better than the original games, and that goes for Dead Space Remake too. It's, I think, one of the reasons why it didn't really perform as well sales-wise as maybe EA was hoping is because it is such a faithful remake. Like, it's almost like you're playing the original again. It's so faithful, but they have improved a lot of things about it. I actually like the remake more than the original. They improved the asteroid shooter sequence, the infamous asteroid shooter. They improved that along with countless other things. They made the ship's construction consistent. Like, it makes sense the way that the ship is structured. Actually, I got flown out to Electronic Arts to play the game early, and I talked with the dev team, and they explained all this to me in person. That was pretty cool. But they actually made the ship structure like it was a real ship, and so things are located in relation to each other that they should be. Whereas the original game, you know, they had loading screens and they kind of teleported you around, and if you looked at like a map of the thing, you're like, wait, but this is over here and that doesn't make sense. So they put a lot of thought into the remake, and I think it improved a lot of things about it. Just all the attention to detail. They basically like perfected the original game, I think. So yeah, I think Dead Space is a remake is a great game, but I feel like top 5 is too high simply because it's action. It's an action game. For PT, I would say PT at number 1 for me. I think PT is the scariest experience that I've had playing a horror game. For a lot of people, though, this is just the demo of a broken promise, Silent Hills, and they're bitter and resentful about it, and they don't want to acknowledge its influence. But like, the fact is, I mean, this game came out 10 years ago, and there are still like brand new indie horror games that are coming out today that are influenced by it and are trying to emulate it. And it's like that for a reason, right? Because it's terrifying. It's too bad that it's basically become lost media at this point. Unless you have a PS4 that has it on it, it's gone. I mean, some people are like making PC versions of it and stuff like that, but PT is not a game. It absolutely is a game. It's a game. The reason that you say it's not a game is because you're buying too much into the marketing materials of it being a demo, but it is a game. It's as complete of a game as any of the indie horror games that I've played over the years on Itch.io or Steam that you would also call a game. It's a game. It's a game. It is in like if it walks like a duck, it looks like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, it's a fucking duck. And that's how I feel about PT too. I'm not gonna get caught up in these technicalities. It's more complete of a game than any demo I've played, for sure. I mean, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a complete experience. All right. Moving on from that, one of the most boring conversations known to man, arguing whether or not a game should be a game or not. Amnesia: The Dark Descent at number 3. Sure. I think it's not as scary as it was in 2010. But what is as scary as it was 14 years ago? If again, like Outlast in 2014, you know, I replayed that and it feels a lot slower than it did on release, and Amnesia certainly feels like that. You play Amnesia today and it's like it really is a slow burn. You're like waiting for something to happen, a lot unlike indie horror games today, where it's like it feels like something is constantly happening because things are so tightly designed that way now for like something to be happening. Amnesia, they really let the game breathe, and as a result, it is pretty slow moving by today's standards, but I think the story is really good. The atmosphere is still really good. I think 3, I don't know, 3 kind of high, but you know, I feel like Amnesia kind of kickstarted the interest in indie horror in the mainstream back 14 years ago, and especially with the modding scene, which it feels like people have completely forgotten about the modding scene for Amnesia, but it kept the life of the game going far beyond its expiration date. And I kind of want to go back and I want to play those old mods and see what they're like today. I did play one of the more well-known ones called White Knight a few years ago on stream, and not only did it not live up to how I remembered it, but I kind of disliked it. So I'm a little scared to play one of the ones that I remember, like The Great Work or Tenebrous Lake or some of those ones that I was just like, these are really good. Anyway. But yeah, Amnesia, you know, respect to Amnesia. Okay, Resident Evil 2 Remake being number 2. I don't hate it. I feel like number 2 is really extremely high. I think if we're going by scare factor, 7 should definitely be somewhere on this list, and the fact that it's not going to be really pains me. But yeah, Resident Evil 2 is a very atmospheric, very modern, like admittedly action heavy game, but I feel like 2 Remake is less of an action game than your Dead Spaces, your RE4s. You know, I feel like it's a little bit slower paced, and it kind of gets back to that kind of more old school survival horror feeling of things. So, but it is still pretty action heavy, I guess, especially the remake. But yeah, I love Resident Evil 2. I love Resident Evil 2. They think it's the best entry in the Resident Evil series. I mean, I think that that's going to be 4 for me, but as far as like best horror entry, 7, I think. RE7, the fact that there's no RE7 on the list at all is upsetting, because I know what number 1 is, and if you've been with us so far, you know what number 1 is too. It's the glaring omission, right? It's Silent Hill 2, and funnily enough, they put the remake on here. What I find very interesting about this list, and I don't even hate this pick. I don't even hate it. I will talk about it, but they picked the remake for Silent Hill 2. They picked the remake for Resident Evil 2. They picked the remake for Dead Space. They picked the remake for Resident Evil 4. But they picked the original for Resident Evil 1, and I just find that kind of fascinating. Especially because, like, the Resident Evil 1 remake, like I said, is one of the most well-received remakes ever. Like, it is, again, to me, the definitive edition of the game, 100%. So I'm a little bit like, why did they not choose the remake? The formula has since been regularly improved upon, and the original is arguably weaker than most of its sequels. Okay, I think this is more of like a respect placement than anything else. I don't know. But still, I mean, you could talk about both. I do kind of feel like they tried too hard not to make this list like Silent Hill, Resident Evil games, because, like, if you come down to it, like, Silent Hill 2 being the only entry in the Silent Hill franchise, what about the original? What about 3? What about 4? You could make the case for all 4 of those games being on a top 25. Just like Resident Evil could have, like, as many as 5 or 6 entries itself. But instead, we've got, like, you know, Visage, Inside, Manhunt. I don't know. It's like Slender the 8 Pages. It's like we could have chucked more Silent Hill and Resident Evil games in there. The fact that, like, there's no Fatal Frame games boggles my mind. They had, of all the Clock Tower games they have Clock Tower: The First Sphere. It's like, you know, I haven't played it, but it seems strange not to have, like, I don't know, a Rule of Rose, a Kuon, a Haunting Ground. I played Haunting Ground, but I haven't played the other 2. Something like that on there, right? I don't know. It's a very strange list to me. But with that said, Silent Hill 2 Remake being number 1. And again, it's weird because if you're gonna make this list, you would think that you would have to put the Silent Hill 2 original somewhere else on the list. I don't know, maybe number 5, 7, 8. Well, like, where do you put it? I don't know. It's on my list. If you're gonna put remake at number 1, though, which again, I don't disagree really that much with it. Like, when I finished playing Silent Hill 2 Remake, I said, this is the best Silent Hill game I've ever played. This is, I think, the best introduction to Silent Hill you can possibly have. You know, for modern players that, you know, and the last Silent Hill game before this was Downpour in, like, 2012. So it's like most people, you know, over the past, like, 12 years haven't played, like, a Silent Hill game. If they didn't have it as, like, a big interest back then, or if they've gotten into gaming in the past 12 years, they probably haven't played a Silent Hill game unless they've got somebody in their lives that's like, you need to go back and play it. I know horror content creators that like their living is covering horror games, and they have not played Silent Hill 2. They have not played Resident Evil 2. They have not played some of these like legendary games. And so the remake is going to be probably going to be their introduction to it. And I think it's a great way to introduce it. I think Bloober knocks the game out of the park. I'm not like totally against it being #1 on a list like this, but I do also think at the same time that this list coming out 2 weeks after Silent Hill 2 remake is published and they're already crowning it the best horror game of all time. I mean, it's been 2 weeks, right? It screams recency bias at the same time. Again, I don't have like a ton of arguments against it, but it is kind of like, how about we wait and see? Like, let's check back in a year and see. Like, maybe put it like #3 for now. I don't know. Feels a little weird to be like, and the best one just came out. Just so happened to just came out. Anyway, interesting. Oh, look, you can see the whole list here. So, okay. Wait, what is this? Oh, this was the audiences. Okay, let's take a look at this. Hey, let's take a look at this. So this was from October 2022, okay? So this is chosen by the IGN audience. So Silent Hill 2 Original, #1. You could have seen that coming. Resident Evil 2 Remake at #2. That agrees with them. 3, Resident Evil 7. I love that. I love seeing Resident Evil 7 that high. Man, Resident Evil 7 is such a good game. I want to go back and replay it. It's like, it's such a good game. Go tell it right. Yeah, man. The thing that makes me mad about RE7 is like when it came out, and even today, it gets shit on by like the old school Resident Evil fans that they want fixed camera angle game number 57 to come out instead, and they're like it's a first person, and they just kind of treat it like the redheaded stepchild based on that. It is a scary game though. Is it perfect? No. The molded are kind of a dumb, annoying enemy after a while. You kind of wish that there were zombies in it. Like, there's lots of little things that I think could have been changed. But overall, I mean, Jack Baker and the house and the Marguerite boss fight. And then the DLC. The DLC for Resident Evil 7 might be the best like collective group of DLC for any game I've ever played. Just 21 by itself. 21 for the RE7 DLC. I am telling you guys, Inscription would not exist without 21. All these other games that have been coming out, like a Flathead, Buckshot Roulette, okay, those games wouldn't exist without Resident Evil 7 21 DLC. It was the first to do it. It was the first to be like, this psychopath wants you to play a game for your life type of thing. So I think, and a lot of people just, it's like they skip on over that aspect of it. I think because a lot of people just don't play DLC for games. I don't know. But that DLC just by itself was legendary. And then you've got other ones that are like the Nightmare mini game was really fun. You had like these little story ones like Daughters, or the one where you're trapped. Marguerite has you trapped in the room and you have to, it's like an escape room situation. It's like a puzzle. Then you've got like the Chris Redfield Not a Hero scenario, which like whatever, you get your action. You got Jack's 55th birthday where you're like feeding him all these ridiculous foods and all the monsters have party hats. Like it's got Ethan Must Die, the roguelike mode. Like they covered everything. They made like a game mode for everything. They had joke modes, they had like time attack modes, they had card games, they had escape rooms, they had everything. They had little bits of story. Yeah, so Resident Evil 7, come on. It's amazing, and the fact that it's not even on this list is crazy. I love you, Castlevania, but I've heard enough. Oh yeah. Anybody recognize it? It's okay if you don't. Anyway, okay, let's take a look. Dead Space, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Silent Hill 1, Resident Evil Village at 7. That's a hot take, I think. I think the more time that I get removed from Resident Evil Village, the more I'm like, that was kind of like, that could have been way better. I think everything in the castle with Lady Dimitrescu is great. But then you got all this weird stuff that they decided to shovel in there, like Chris Redfield showing up to your house and shooting your wife, and then not telling you anything and just be like, "Don't worry about it, Ethan. Anyway, see ya." It like doesn't make any sense. And then you got like these horrible set pieces like Heisenberg's factory. And then like I like the dollhouse. That one was cool, but like how the flooded water swamp area, just Village is very uneven for me. I think it's carried a lot by like that Resident Evil 7 gameplay. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I don't really like about it. That now that like more and more time is in between us. And the DLC for Village, the Rose DLC, I don't know. What was that? That was like a one and done for me. I'm never playing that again. I'm like, number 7, really? October 2022 though, like it was really fresh on everybody's mind back then, so you got Resident Evil 7 original. Like, see, this is just gonna be Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. The only non-Resident Evil Silent Hill game that you got on here so far is number 4, Dead Space. Other than that, Silent Hill 3, number 9, 10 Resident Evil, 11 PT, 11 Dead Space 2, 13 BioShock. Not a single indie game so far, all AAA. Alien Isolation, Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 3, original then remake, and then we got our first indie game with Outlast at number 18. And then it's back to AAA. Evil Within, Evil Within 2, Bloodborne. What? Let me be clear, Bloodborne is one of the greatest games of all time, but the fact that it's number 21 on best horror games list, fan voted, is legitimately funny to me. Until Dawn, Alan Wake 1, this is before Alan Wake 2 was released. Silent Hill 4, wow, Silent Hill 4 way down here. Amnesia The Dark Descent, number 25. Fatal Frame, Resident Evil 4 VR, Outlast 2 at 28. See, this is my thing, guys. This is my thing, okay? Most people do not play indie horror games. They don't. And then they sit there and they have all these opinions on like, what are the best horror games and stuff. They do not play them though. Like the fact, like you're not gonna see a game like Anatomy on here. You're not gonna see, I don't know, some like the Gems. You're not gonna see a Puppet Combo game or a Chilla's Art game, or I don't know. It's just kind of annoys me. I had to get it off my chest. Limbo 29, Fear number 30. I knew it. I knew it. This is, and I say this trying my best not to be a weird gatekeeping type, but this is such a normie list. Little Nightmares, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Fatal Frame 2. Soma 34, my god, it's so low. Silent Hill Origins, Resident Evil 0. What? See, there's so much name recognition here, and just being like, like literally any Resident Evil game gets like put on the list. Fear 2, oh my god. Little Nightmares 2. Left 4 Dead 1 and 2 at 39 and 40 respectively. Silent Hill Shattered Memories, Phasmophobia, Resident Evil Revelations. Dead Space 3. Inside. Dead Space. I like. Dead Space 3 is like legitimately like an awful game. Next thing you know, Resident Evil 6 is gonna be on the game on the list. Dead Space 3. I couldn't finish it. It was that bad. It was such a bad game. I couldn't finish it. I even made it most of the way through. Resident Evil Revelations is like a comedy game. They literally have like comedy relief characters that come in and do funny voices and stuff. Revelations 2 is much better. Revelations 2 is like 3 times the game that Revelations 1 is. Telltale's Walking Dead, Visage, Condemned, Criminal Origins, Silent Hill Homecoming, and then Resident Evil 5 at number 50. That's like, bro, I know people meme on this IGN list. I mean, it's not good in a lot of ways, but this is a way worse list. This fan voted one. It's like the further you get away from the top 10. Sorry, I accidentally clicked on one. Don't play the video. Turn it off. No, I don't want it. Okay. As I was saying, the further you get away from the top 10, like it's sort of agreeable in the top 10, but then the further away you get from the top 10, the more you're just like, really? I don't know. Bloodborne at 21, Until Dawn, Resident Evil 4 BR. Yeah. There. You know what? There. The music's at like literally volume 2 out of 100. It's depressing. It's depressing. It really is. Like, let me go through and count how many indies are on here. There's Outlast 1 and 2. There's Amnesia. There's Soma. And then after that, it's like, I mean, Phasmo. I guess technically Telltale was an indie game, right? At first. Before they got like big publisher money and stuff. So it's like, what, five indie games? On a top 50? People don't play indie horror games. They don't. Anyway. Okay. Well, that was fun. Sort of, but depressing in the end. What did y'all think of it? You thought it was great? You agreed with everything? You thought the whole thing was unquestionably legit? I loved seeing Until Dawn on the list. No, I'm not gonna make a list. I've already made lists, by the way. They're on YouTube. And they have some of the meanest comments of any of my videos. Because there's a lot of people out there that don't play horror games. And they think that the whole list should just be like, it should just be like that we just read. S tier, all the Resident Evil games, all the Silent Hill games. A tier, all the Fatal Frame games, all the Siren games, all the AAA, all the Dead Space games. F tier, Five Nights at Freddy's. That's what they think. That's what they think it should be. Oh, what a surprise. Somebody who's never played Five Nights at Freddy's thinks that FNAF should be F tier. Great.